I'd been dead for 7 years, and I rode into Quail Hollow on the day the mountain finally decided to prove it. You don't expect to read your own name carved into a churchyard stone, but there, it was when I came down off the Burnt Fork Trail that gray April afternoon, Owen Brandt, and under it the year the valley had given me up. The rain was coming sideways off the peaks. The Burnt Fork River was the color of a bad bruise and 3 feet higher than I'd ever seen it. And somewhere above the town, the old earthen dam we'd all hauled rock for as young men was holding back more water than it had any right to hold. I sat my horse in front of that stone with the cold running down my collar, and I thought, well, a man comes a long way to find out the world has gone on without him. Then I lifted my eyes past the churchyard fence and saw the mill wheel turning slow against the swollen creek, and I forgot the stone entirely. Because the mill meant Della, and if the mill still stood, then so did the one reason I'd kept breathing through everything that should have killed me. Let me tell it the way it happened, because the why of it matters more than the stone ever could. 7 years before, I had been a long-legged fool of 24 who loved Della Sumner more than was sensible and had nothing to offer her but a saddle and good intentions. Her father, old Josiah Sumner, ran the only grist mill in the Burnt Fork Valley, and he was not a cruel man, only a careful one. When I asked could I marry his daughter, he didn't laugh at me, which was kinder than I deserved. He said, "Owen, she'd starve happy with you, and I won't have my girl happy and starving both. Go make something a man can build on, then we'll talk." Della had walked me to the gate that night and pressed her hand flat against my chest like she was trying to memorize the beat of it. 2 years, she'd said. Make your money and come home. I'll be at this mill, Owen Brandt, grinding other men's wheat and saving my own heart for you. Don't you dare die out there. And I'd laughed because at 24 you think dying is a thing that happens to other men. So I rode north with a trail crew, and then I took up with a railroad outfit cutting grade through the high country because that was where the real money was. I learned water on that work. I learned how it moves and what it wants, and how a hillside that stood 1,000 years will let go all at once when the rain gets into it. I learned to read a seep, to hate a soft spot, to respect a thing that has no malice and no mercy and will drown you just the same. I sent her letters. I want that understood, because of all the things the valley believed about me, the cruelest was the one that said I'd forgotten her. I sent letters every month with whatever freighter or rider was headed south, and I sent money sewn into the seams of them, dollar by dollar, the slow, honest fortune old Josiah had told me to build. The letters never came. I didn't know that then. I only knew that hers stopped coming back, and a man on a railroad cut 100 miles from anywhere has no way to know whether silence means a girl has stopped writing or whether a thieving freight agent named, well, his name doesn't matter. He's long since answered for it to a court if not to God, has been opening every southbound letter for the coin inside and burning the rest. I told myself she was busy. I told myself the mill kept her. I told myself 100 things, and I kept cutting grade, and I kept sending letters into a dark that swallowed them whole. Then came the wreck. A whole section of fresh-cut hillside let go in a spring like this one, too much snow, too warm a rain, the ground gone to soup, and it took the work train and 11 men with it down into the gorge. They pulled out what they could. 2 of us they didn't, and one of those 2 was carrying papers that said Owen Brandt. I'd traded coats with a fellow named Brandt, first name Asa, no kin of mine, just a man who'd admired the wool and offered a fair price, not 3 days before, and my old letters and my name were in the pocket when the mountain came down. So the railroad wrote to the valley that Owen Brandt was dead, and the valley believed it because a railroad does not lie about its dead. And I was 40 miles the other direction with a broken leg and a fever, laid up in a Mormon farmwife's spare room learning to walk again, knowing none of it. It took me 2 years to heal right, and 2 more to admit the silence from home was not going to break on its own. And it took me 3 more after that, drifting, driving cattle, working dams now, because water was the one thing I understood, to save what I'd lost in the wreck, and to find the spine to come back and learn the worst. A man can put off the worst a long time when he's afraid the worst is true. So that is who rode into Quail Hollow that April afternoon. Not a ghost, though the town would treat me like one, but a 40-year-old man with gray coming into his beard, a healed leg that ached before rain, 7 years of saved wages in a money belt under his shirt, and a heart that had refused, against all sense, to bury itself in the wrong grave. I came down the main street and nobody knew me. That's a strange thing, to ride through the town of your boyhood and have men you'd swum the river with as a boy look right past you. I'd changed. The trail does that. But it was more than my face. It was that the dead don't ride down Front Street, so their eyes told them I couldn't be who I was. I tied up outside the mill, and I stood a long moment in the rain listening to the wheel groan against the high water, and then I went in. She had her back to me. She was at the hopper with her sleeves pushed up and flour to her elbows, and a boy of maybe 10 was sweeping the leavings, and she was saying something to him over the rumble of the stones, patient, a little tired, the voice of a woman who'd run a hard business alone a long time and gotten good at it. The years had set themselves into her, the way they do into anybody worth a damn, and they had not made her less. They'd made her more. There was a steadiness in the line of her shoulders that the girl at the gate hadn't had. She'd become herself in my absence, become it without me, and standing there, I felt the full weight of what I'd cost the both of us. And also, God help me, a foolish pride in her that near closed my throat. The boy saw me first. He stopped sweeping. She turned, brushing a strand of hair off her forehead with the back of a floury wrist, already half a word into, "Can I help?" And then she saw me, and the word died, and the color went out of her face like water out of a cracked jug. "No," she said, "just that, no." "Della, you're dead," she said it flat, almost angry, like I'd broken a rule. "They sent a letter, there's a stone. You're dead, Owen. I put flowers on it. I put flowers on a stone for you." Her hand had gone to the hopper's edge and was holding it white-knuckled. 7 years. "I wrote you," I said. "It was all I had. It came out rough. Every month. I swear before God I wrote you every month, and I never knew until, Della, the letters never reached you, and the wreck, they had my name on a man who wasn't me, and I've spent 2 years getting back the strength to walk, and 3 more getting up the nerve to come and find out if you—" I stopped. The boy was staring between us with his mouth open. The wheel groaned. Outside, the rain hammered down, and under it, low and steady and wrong, I could hear the river. "Get out," she said. I want to be honest about this part, because it would be a prettier story if she'd run into my arms, and it wouldn't be a true one. A woman who has grieved a man, buried him, laid flowers, and slowly, at terrible cost, taught herself to stop reaching for him in the dark. That woman does not forgive the dead for walking back in the door. Not in an afternoon. What I'd given her by living was not a gift. Not yet. It was a wound torn back open. She had every right to the fury, and she used all of it. "Della, you don't get to," she said, and now her voice was shaking. "You don't get to be alive. Do you understand what it—" "Get out, Owen. Get out of my mill." So I got out. I went and I stood in the rain by my horse, and I thought about riding right back up the burnt fork trail and letting the dead stay dead, since that seemed to be what everyone, herself included, would prefer. And I likely would have if I hadn't, while I stood there with the cold coming through my coat, looked up the valley toward the dam. I'd helped build it. Half the men in the valley had, 20-odd years back, an earthen dam thrown up across the throat of the burnt fork canyon to hold the spring melt and feed the irrigation ditches all summer. A good idea, in its way. But I'd spent 5 years on real dams since then. Built by engineers with instruments and a healthy fear of water, and I knew now what we hadn't known then, that the burnt fork dam was a proud, ignorant pile of dirt and rock, too steep on its downstream face, its spillway too small, with no proper core to it, and that it had been holding back the meltwater of an ordinary spring for 2 decades, and had never once been tested by a spring like the one bearing down on us now. And I could see, even from the town, even through the rain, that the water behind it was nearly to the crest. I stood there a long while. Then I got back on my horse and I rode up to look at it close, because dead or not, forgiven or not, I was the only man within 50 miles who knew what he was looking at. And the mill and Della in it, and the boy, and 400 souls in the lower valley, sat square in the path of what that dam would loose if it let go. What I found at the dam was worse than I feared, and exactly what I'd feared, which is the way of these things. The water was 8 inches from the crest and rising. The spillway, a notched channel cut to one side to carry off the overflow, was choked half shut with brush, and a tangle of trees the high water had floated down and jammed against it, so that even the relief it was meant to give was throttled. And down at the toe of the dam, on the dry downstream side where no water should ever be, a spring had come up through the ground, clear at first glance. But when I swung down and went to my knees beside it and let it run through my fingers, it ran cloudy. It was carrying fine grains of soil. It was carrying the dam itself out through its own belly, grain by grain, and every grain it carried widened the path for the next, and that quiet, clear-running little spring that any of those proud builders would have walked right past was the beginning of the end. A piping failure, the engineers called it. I'd seen one take a dam in an afternoon. Once it starts in earnest, it does not stop, and it does not give you much time. I rode back down to town faster than was safe on that footing, and I went straight to the man who'd built the thing, who happened also to be the man whose roof I least wanted to stand under. Augustus Hale was the closest thing Quail Hollow had to a great man. He'd built the dam, he'd built the ditch company that watered every farm in the lower valley. He sat on the bank board and the church board and any other board worth sitting on, and he had been, in the years I was gone, a steady visitor at the Sumner Mill. That last I learned in his own front parlor, and I'll come to it. First I tried to make him understand about the spring. He did not want to understand. Men like Hale never do, about a thing they built. To believe me, he'd have had to believe that the proudest work of his life was killing the town, and a man cannot turn that corner in an afternoon any more than a woman can ungrieve her dead. He stood by his fire dry while I dripped on his floor, and he heard piping failure, and the toe is bleeding fines, and you've got hours, not days. And he heard underneath it a dead drifter come back to tell him his life's work was a lie. The dam has held 20 years, he said. It's never held water like this. You've been gone 7 of those years, Brant. You've been gone so long the county thought you were buried, and you'll ride back in on the worst spring in memory and tell me how my dam fails. He wasn't shouting. He was worse than shouting. He was certain. Go sober up, or go back to wherever you've been. There's no call to frighten the town with a drifter's nonsense. I'll give Hale this much, looking back. He was not a wicked man. He was a proud one, and pride and water make the deadliest pair I know. But I had no time to soften him, and I made a poor job of trying, and I left his house knowing the one man with the authority to call out the town would not do it on the word of a ghost. Which left me standing in the rain with knowledge that was going to get 400 people killed, and not a soul who'd believe me. Except it turned out one. She'd followed me. I don't know how long Della had been standing under the eave of Hale's porch in her oilskin, with the rain dripping off the brim of her hat, but when I came down the steps she was there, and her face was no longer furious. It was afraid, and it was studying me the way she'd studied a thing her whole life before she trusted it. I heard you in there, she said. Through the window. Owen, is it true? The dam. It's true. You're sure? Della, I have built dams for 5 years. I have seen one fail. I would give my right arm to be wrong, and I am not wrong. That water is coming down this valley, and when it comes it will take the lower farms and the church and the mill and most of Front Street, and it will do it in the dark probably, sometime in the next day or two, because that's when the cold lets up and the melt comes hardest. I heard my own voice crack. And Hale won't ring the bell, and they won't believe a dead man, and I don't know what to do. I came back to tell you I never stopped writing, and instead I've come back to watch the river kill you. So no, I'm not sure of much, but I'm sure of the dam. She looked at me a long moment in the rain, And then she did the thing that told me, more than any word ever could, who Della Sumner had become in my absence. She didn't cry, and she didn't fall on me, and she didn't ask me to prove it twice. She set her jaw and she said, "Then we don't wait for hail and we don't wait for the bell. People know me. They've trusted me with their grain and their debts 20 years. They'll listen to me where they won't listen to a stranger. Tell me what has to happen, and I'll start the part that's mine, while you start the part that's yours." I could have kissed her right there on Hale's Walk. I didn't. There wasn't time and I hadn't earned it. But something in my chest that had been clenched 7 years came loose, and I started talking fast, the way you talk when the clock's against you, about spillways and warnings and high ground, and she listened with her whole sharp mind. And from that minute we were not a grieved woman and a returned ghost anymore. We were two people with a job, and the job was 400 lives. Here is what we worked out, standing in the rain, and here is roughly how the next day and a half went, because I have learned that people like to know the how of a thing and not just the that of it. The dam would go. Nothing I could do in a day would stop a piping failure once it had set its teeth, and I told her so plain. But there were two things that could be done, and we split them. The first was to buy time and bleed off pressure, to clear that choked spillway so the rising water had somewhere to run that wasn't over or through the dam. Every inch of head we could keep off the crest was minutes, maybe an hour of grace. That was my job, because it was filthy dangerous work in fast water, and I would not ask another man to stand where I'd stand. The second thing, the thing that actually mattered, was to get every living soul in the flood's path up onto high ground before it came, and to do it without the panic that kills as many as the water, and that was Della's, because the valley loved and trusted her, and they'd move for her. She started that very night. I have never in my life seen anyone work a valley the way Della Sumner worked the burnt fork that night and the long day after. She didn't ring a bell and shout flood. She went farm to farm in the dark and the wet. The boy, his name was Toby, an orphan she'd taken in 2 winters back and fed and schooled and loved as her own, though she'd never have used so soft a word riding double behind her. And at every door she was calm and she was cert, and she gave them a thing to do. "The river's going to come up bad with the melt," she'd say. "Owen Brant's back and he's read the dam and we none of us like it. So we're moving the stock up to the Sumner pasture above the bench tonight, and you'll bring your people up to the mill yard by tomorrow noon, and we'll all be wrong together and laugh about it next week." She gave them work, is what she did. A frightened man freezes, a working man moves. By midnight there were lanterns strung clear up the valley, and cattle lowing their way up to the high pasture, and wagons being loaded by men who'd have called me a liar to my face, but would not call Della Sumner one. And me, I was at the spillway, and that was its own kind of hell. I won't dress it up. Clearing a choked spillway in flood is about the worst work there is. The brush jam was packed tight as a beaver dam by the weight of the water behind it, and it sat right at the lip where the channel dropped away, so that a man wrestling logs loose was a man standing at the edge of a chute with the whole reservoir at his back, working to set free the very current that would take him if he slipped. Prout came up to help, old Lemuel Prout, a freighter I'd run cattle with as a boy, who'd looked at me on Front Street and not pretended I was dead. The first man in town to shake my hand, and a few others Della's certainty had shamed off their porches. And through the rest of that night, and into the gray morning, we worked that jam apart log by log with peavies and chains, and a team of mules hauling on the big timbers from up the bank. Twice it near took me. Once a log I'd freed rolled and pinned my bad leg against another, and the water surged, and for a long black moment I thought, well, the second grave will be more honest than the first, and then Prout got a chain on the log and the mules took up and it rolled off me. The second time I went in. A whole section of the jam let go at once when we didn't expect it, and the suck of it pulled my feet out from under me, and I was in the spillway chute in the cold roaring dark with the breath driven out of me, and I would have gone down it and over and been done, except that there was a rope around my chest, because Della, before she'd ridden off to work the valley, had stood over me and tied that rope herself and looped it round a deadman post she'd set with her own hands, and she'd said, You don't get to drown twice, Owen Brant. I won't allow it. And she admitted as fury, and it had saved my life. Prout and two others hauled me out coughing on the bank, and I lay there a minute looking up at the rain, and I laughed because the rope had held, and that meant somewhere in the cold flint of her she had not yet decided to let me die after all. We got the spillway open by mid-morning. It ran brown and full and angry, but it ran, and the rise of the reservoir slowed, and we bought our hours. I sent Prout down to tell Della the spillway was clear and to tell Hale, one more time, that the dam itself was failing and the spillway only bought time, not safety, and that the town had to be empty by dark. Hale still wouldn't ring the bell, but the town was emptying anyway, because the town had stopped waiting for Hale. It was emptying because a miller's daughter had spent a night and a morning telling 400 people exactly what to do, and they had looked at her steady eyes and her flour-burned hands, and the way she'd never once lied to any of them about a debt or a weight or a price, and they had decided that if Della Sumner said go up the ridge, they'd go up the ridge. By that afternoon, the lower valley was a ghost of itself. Stock up the bench, families up the mill road, wagons of bedding and grandmothers and birdcages, and one upright piano creaking up to high ground, and the only ones left below were the handful of us still working, and the few stubborn old men who would not leave their porches for anything short of the water itself. I came down off the dam at last to find Della in the mill yard, soaked through and gray with exhaustion and giving orders to the very last of it, and I stood in the gate the way I had a lifetime ago, and she looked up and saw me, and something passed between us across that muddy yard that I don't have the words for. She didn't smile. She just looked at me a long second, alive, the both of us, in the middle of all that water, and then she went back to her work, and I went back to mine, and it was enough. It was, for the moment, everything. But I haven't told you about Hale, and I have to, because a thing happened that night that I have never forgotten, and that taught me the difference between a proud man and a coward, which is not nearly so wide as people think. Augustus Hale, when he finally believed, and he did believe late, when the river told him in a voice no man could argue with, Augustus Hale did not run. I'll grant him that to my grave. The dam went at full dark, the way I'd reckoned it would, the way the cold easing off and the melt coming hard always brings it. There was a sound first. I have heard it once before, and I hope to God never again. A deep sucking groan from up the canyon, the sound of a great deal of earth deciding all at once to stop being a wall, and then a roar that you felt in the soles of your feet before you heard it in your ears. And in the fire-lit chaos of the mill yard, with the last wagons whipping up the ridge road and the water already loose in the dark below us, Augustus Hale rode down, not up, down toward the lower farms. Because in his pride he had told 3 families that morning that the dam would hold and they need not move, and now in the dark he was riding to drag those 3 families out of its way with his own hands, knowing the water was already loosed, knowing what it would do to a man caught in the open. He'd been wrong, and the wrongness was about to kill people, and he rode straight into it to set right what his certainty had set wrong. 2 of those 3 families he got up the bank ahead of the water. The third, the Carrows, with their place lowest of all, he reached just as it came, and he put the mother and the 2 little ones up behind him and on Prout's horse, and he stayed in the saddle in the rising flood, directing them up the right line to the bench, and the water took him doing it. They found him 3 days later a mile down the valley. He had saved 9 people that he'd nearly killed with his pride, and I have never since been able to hold a simple grudge against a proud man, because I learned that night that the same pride that builds a bad dam can ride a man straight into a flood to save the souls his folly endangered. He earned his stone honest, did Hale, which is more than I can say for the one with my name on it. The flood itself I will tell plainly and without dwelling, because 400 people lived, and that is the only part of it that matters. The dam went, and the burnt fork came down the valley in the dark, and it took the lower farms and the church and a long stretch of front street, and it backed up against the bench where we'd all gathered, and it stood there roaring in the firelight like a living thing cheated of its meal, and it did not get one. Not one soul of the valley died in that water but for Hale, who chose the way he went. The high pasture held the stock. The mill road held the wagons. The bench held the people. Della Sumner's long, calm night of going door to door had emptied the valley of everything the river wanted, and the river got mud and timber and one upright piano that turned up a half-mile downstream lodged in a cottonwood, where it sat playing nothing for years and became, I'm told, a kind of valley landmark. The mill went. I should say that. The old Sumner mill that her father built and that she'd run alone for 7 years, and that had been the one fixed star I'd steered home by. The water took it in the night, wheel and stones and roof, and in the morning there was nothing where it had stood but the bare mill race running clear and a few foundation stones, and the iron of the great shaft bent up out of the mud like a buried hand. I found her standing in front of where it had been at dawn, with Toby's hand in hers and the gray light coming up over a valley that was half a lake. She'd lost the work of her whole life in a night. And I came and stood beside her, earned it now, or near enough, and I didn't say I was sorry, because sorry was too small, and I didn't say we'll rebuild it, because it wasn't mine to say. I just stood there with her in the cold dawn looking at the wreck of everything, and after a while she said, not looking at me, "You wrote me every month. Every month. And they never came. They never came. A man on the railroad was opening them for the money I sewed in and burning the rest. I didn't learn that till I came home. Della, I would no more have left you in silence than I'd have cut off my own hand. I have 7 years of letters I couldn't send and didn't know where to send, and a money belt full of the wages I was building so your father would let me marry you, and your father's gone, and the mill's gone, and I'm so far past the time I should have come home that I don't know if there's any home left to come to. But I never stopped. I want that to be the thing you know, whatever you decide. I never once stopped." She was quiet a long time. The water lapped at the new shore where Front Street used to be. "I grieved you," she said finally. "I grieved you so long and so hard I thought it would put me in the ground next to your stone, and then I stopped. 2 years ago. I made myself stop because a person can't live in a grave forever, and there was the boy and the mill, and I made myself put you down and pick up the rest of my life." She turned and looked at me at last, and her eyes were wet and steady both. "And Augustus Hale had been kind to me, and patient, and he was a good man under all his pride. And I had near decided to marry him this fall, not because I loved him but because I was tired, Owen. I was so tired of carrying everything by myself. And he was steady and he was here and you were dead." Her voice broke and held. "And now he's dead, and he died a better man than he lived, and you're not dead at all, and the whole world I'd finally made peace with is washed down the valley with my father's mill, and I'm standing in the mud at dawn and I do not know what to feel." "You don't have to know this morning," I said. "I've had 7 years and I still don't half know. I'm not asking you for an answer, Della. I rode in here yesterday only meaning to find out if you were alive and to tell you the truth and then ride out and let you be. The dam changed that, not me. I'll stay as long as the valley needs hands to rebuild, and I'll keep my distance whatever you want, and if at the end of it you tell me to go, I'll go and I won't haunt you. You've buried me once. I'd not make you do it twice." She looked at me, and then she looked at the wreck of the mill, and then she looked down at Toby, who'd been silent through all of it the way children go silent when the grown world cracks open over their heads. And then Della Sumner did a thing that I will carry to my own honest grave. She let go of the boy's hand, and she crossed the few feet of mud between us, and she put her flat hand against my chest the way she had at the gate a lifetime ago, and she stood there a moment feeling the beat of it like she was making sure, this time, that it was real and would stay. "Don't you dare die out there," she whispered, the same words, the old vow, and this time it wasn't fury. This time it was the start of forgiveness, which is a slower and a truer thing than the kind they put in songs. We didn't fall into each other's arms in the mud. We were too old and too wrung out and too freshly grieved for that, and besides, Toby was watching, and there was a valley to dig out. But she kept her hand on my chest a long moment, and I covered it with my own, and that was the morning the dead came home for good. We rebuilt the mill. Of course we did. It took 2 years, and it was the whole valley that did it. Every family Della had walked up the ridge that night came down again to set stone for the woman who'd saved them, and they raised her a new mill bigger and truer than the old one, with a proper race and a proper wheel, and I built the dam works for it myself, and you may be sure I built them with a respect for water that I'd paid for in full. They named the new bridge over the burnt fork the Hale Crossing, and rightly. And they took my name off the false stone in the churchyard, though Della told me she kept the flowers going on it that one last spring out of a kind of stubbornness, putting flowers on the grave of the man I'd been so the man I'd become could court her properly above ground. Which I did. I courted Della Sumner 2 full years like a young man, slow and clean and in the daylight, because we'd both earned the right to do it right. And at the end of it she chose me freely, with the mill rebuilt and her livelihood her own and no tiredness driving her and no father's permission needed. A grown woman who'd run a valley through a flood deciding with her clear eyes open that she'd have the drover after all. We married in the new church on a bright fall day with the burnt fork running low and sweet below the dam I'd built to hold it honest. Toby stood up with us. He calls me Pa now, has for years, though he was near grown before he'd let the word out, being a careful boy, which is the best kind. Prout gave the bride away, the river having taken the man who'd otherwise have done it. And when the preacher said the words, I looked at Della Sumner, Della Brandt, the second name she'd ever carried and the only one she chose, and I thought of all the silence and all the saved wages burned in some thief's stove, and all the years a railroad's mistake had stolen out of the both of us. And I could not be sorry, because they had carried me, at the last, back to this exact morning, and this exact woman with the light coming through the new glass onto her steady face. A man learns, if he lives long enough and loses enough, what the saving thing in his life truly is. I thought for 7 years it was the money belt, the fortune old Josiah told me to build. It wasn't. The saving thing was a rope around my chest tied by a furious woman who hadn't yet decided to forgive me and wasn't going to let me drown before she got the chance. The saving thing was a valley that moved up a ridge in the dark on the word of a miller's daughter. The saving thing was that neither of us, in 7 years of every reason to, ever quite managed to let the other go. The mill turns yet. I can hear it from the porch as I write this, the new wheel against the burnt fork, grinding other men's wheat the way her father did and his father before him. Della's hair has gone the silver of mountain water and mine the gray of trail dust, and Toby's got a wife and a little one of his own up the valley, and there's a child's pair of worn boots by our own hearth most evenings, his boy left behind from a visit. The dam holds. I see to that. And every spring when the melt comes hard and the river runs the color of a bruise, I ride up to the works and put my hand to the stone and read the seep, and I think about how close it all came. And then I ride home down the mill road to the woman who buried me once and dug me up for good. And I am, against every reasonable expectation a man could have, the most fortunate ghost in the territory. Don't you dare die out there, she'd said twice, 7 years apart. I never did, Della. I came home. I'm home yet. And I aim to stay above ground a good while longer, listening to your wheel turn with your hand someplace near my heart where it's belonged the whole time.